A friend of mine had asked me uh, earlier today or yesterday about my opinions about what the Supreme Court might do when it comes to the Colorado ruling kicking Trump off the ballot. And I've discussed this a little bit on the podcast before, but one of the things that I'm thinking about what that might happen, there are many options of what they could do. I mean, they could go, completely off the wall and say, yes, Donald Trump was an insurrectionist, therefore he's not eligible for any ballot. Of course, they're not going to do that. They're way too conservative activists. They're not going to do something that's going to just kick him off the ballot. That's never going to happen. They could side with Colorado, and they could make the argument that each state has the ability to determine its own election rules, and therefore, if an individual state says that Trump is ineligible because of the 14th Amendment, then each state has the ability to do so. That is a possibility. I don't know if that is a probability, but that's a possibility. But one of the things that I think that they might do, and if they do this, you heard it here potentially first. I don't know if any other people have posited this line of thinking. But here's what I think could happen when they rule on the Colorado ban of him on the ballot. This is a primary election. This is not the general election. So in the primary election, what you're voting for is not for somebody to sit in the office, but you're voting for somebody to be a party nominee. So in reality, even though this is an election to see who will be a party nominee, so this is a private election, even though it's run publicly. As such, the Supreme Court may very well just say, this isn't the election for president, this is the election for nominee, so therefore the 14th Amendment doesn't apply here because you're just voting on the nominee, you're not voting on who's going to be president. So that would be this election. So Trump would then be allowed to stay on these ballots because the 14th Amendment wouldn't come into play because it doesn't control who would be a private political party's nominee. Then, when it comes to the general election, if this were to come back up again with the general election and somebody were to sue then, the Supreme Court would then say, well, when you're voting in the election, you're not voting for the candidate. The Supreme Court would then probably say, you're not voting for Trump or Biden, assuming those are the two candidates, which is most likely it's going to be. You're voting for the electors. And it's the electors who then select the president. So since it's the electors who are technically on the ballot, and it's electors for individual people, but since you're voting for the electors, now the electors themselves, according to the 14th Amendment, can't have been insurrectionists. So if you see that any of those electors were at the insurrection, you could then have them removed from the ballot, absolutely. But if Donald Trump was absolutely an insurrectionist, which I clearly believe he is, that in and of itself wouldn't be enough to remove people who are trying to be his electors from the ballot, at least according to the Supreme Court, in my opinion. I don't think the Supreme Court would support removing people running to be his electors from the ballot. Because again, you're not voting for him, you're voting for his electors. So then, those electors would then come and cast their ballots in the Electoral College, and then it would come time for certification of those Electoral College ballots from being cast. At which point, when would you challenge that? You would challenge that on January 6, 2025. So the Supreme Court would probably say that the appropriate time to challenge whether or not Donald Trump can serve as president would be on January 6, 2025. At which point you would probably need to have a majority in both the House and the Senate in order to effectively challenge the results of that election. And if Donald Trump has enough electoral votes to actually win the presidency, he likely then also has enough votes in the House and Senate to effectively ward off any challenge as to whether or not he is validly on the ballot. And then any Supreme Court challenge would probably then say it would have been up to the people certifying the election to determine whether or not Donald Trump should have been on the ballot or not. It would have been up to Congress to do that, and they would maybe look at one of the later things that's up to Congress. So I think the Supreme Court would punt 3 different times using those reasonings because they don't want to get mucked up with the whole Bush v. Gore ruling like they did back in 2000. So that's my prediction on how they're going to rule. And if they do rule that way, January 15th, 2024, you heard it here first. If they don't, I'll be rather surprised. I still think they're not going to say, yes, Trump's going to be off the ballot. I don't think they're going to rule in a way that keeps Trump off the ballot. But I think that they're going to rule in a way, because, short version of the story, they won't keep Trump off the primary ballot because it's a party primary, so therefore it's not an election for president. Then they won't keep Trump off the general election ballot because you're not voting for Trump, you're voting for electors. And then the only time you would have to act to actually keep Trump from being president at that point would be January 6th, where you would then make the argument that he's an insurrectionist and therefore not valid to be president. So anyway, what do you think? Leave your comments below. Agree or disagree. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.